As soon as images of the Nike GP Challenge 1 started surfacing, people started speculating on if it was the heir apparent to the Nike GP Turbo, one of just the best tennis shoes in the last decade. And not just best tennis shoes, because that's a personal opinion, but definitely one of the most unique tennis shoes in the last decade. So, do these heir apparents actually live up to the Turbos, and are they good shoes on their own? Let's get into it. And a huge thanks to Tennis Warehouse for sending me a pair of the GP Challenge ones to check out. If you want to pick up a pair for yourself, I will leave a link in the description below. The uppers of the GP Challenge 1 are a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde. It is mostly meshing on there, and then also bits of really strong rubber. The tongue in these things is incredibly flimsy. It did take me a while to actually get that tongue into position and then be able to tie it down. The lockdown on these is not as good as maybe some other Nike shoes on the market right now, like the Vapor 11, Vapor Pro 2, just because the tongue and ankle collar are a little bit more minimalist. What is not minimalist though is the lockdown around the midfoot. With a separate rubber piece coming up all the way from the strobe board integrating with the lace line, you do get a tremendous feeling of lockdown in the midfoot, and then on the toe drag guard you get another piece of rubber, which on the upper durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, really doesn't even make a scuff on there. So in terms of dragging or sliding, because it meets directly with outsole tread, it's absolutely fantastic. The reason I say these are a Jekyll and Hyde upper though, is that they can hold on to some moisture. These things heated up 163.3 degrees on the breathability test, that heat gun in there. And then if you look at the breathability mapping of them, yeah, the tongue breathes a lot because there's not a lot connecting it to the rest of the shoe, but it just seems that there are parts of this shoe that are going to hold on to a lot of heat and moisture. I think number one, the rubber components, and number two, the sidewalls of them, and the fact that there is, you know, a lot of padding underneath of these. So they are a little bit more minimalist in the ankle collar, so you are going to have some egress of heat out of the shoe. I also noticed on foot they are a little warm. They're not bad whatsoever. On a very hot, humid day though, I would make sure you are wearing socks that breathe really well, just so that you can use the tools of the tongue and of the egress points of the shoe to circulate air. The midsole of the GP Challenge 1 is definitely not the same as the GP Turbo. Number one, it has two independent zoom air units. They are both top loaded, which means they're right underneath the strobe board. And then it has that speed board plate, which is semi-constrained. You can actually see it jutting out the medial side of the shoe. Now that speed board, honestly, I've talked about this before in some other videos, I really like that speed board. It got a shank score of 0.2 on my system because it is top loaded. There's a presence of a shank, but it's just flexible enough to give a little bit of that diving board effect, but it's broad enough to capture a lot of the arch. So a lot of times, you know, if a shank is really stiff, it gives more, you know, bounce, more feedback, right? It wants to spring back. Whereas on the speed board, it's an elastic material. It's an elastic plastic type material, but it's so broad that when your foot is transitioning step, it's really like flexing with your foot. You really can't feel it. It is a different experience. It's not the full length Pebex plate like in the GP Turbo, but it does do a similar job. One thing I like about the springboard plate, the playability wise, is that I can get really far back on my serve and rock really far back. And I do feel like I have a little bit of springboard when going for that. Is that placebo effect because I like the feeling of that springboard? Maybe. But I have noticed that my kick serves just feel a little bit more coil and uncoil, which is pretty cool. Now, if you look at this on the bounce height test, got 39 centimeters in the heel and then 44 in the forefoot, which is really no joke. And just like the GP Challenge Pro, to me, a lot of the best aspects of the midsole can be found on the periphery. Number one, you get a lateral flange on the heel as well as in the forefoot. The GP Challenge Pros are a little bit more pronounced, but you still have them. And then on the medial side, you do get a medial flange on the heel. And then the medial forefoot juts out a little bit as well too for a little bit more push off. So the geometry and just kind of the cutouts and where they are of the midsole, to me, is just as good, if not better than the GP Turbo. It's just what's on the inside. You know, do you want this or would you rather have the full length zoom of the Turbos? One other thing I do want to make mention of in the midsole teardown though, is all the stitching from these outrigger lace eyelets here in the midfoot that go all the way down into the strobel. That is some really good build quality of these lace eyelets, which means all that tension you're creating when you're tying the shoelaces, it is going all the way through these into the strobel, and it is nice to see that they are so sewn in, kind of a double reinforcement there. So like I said, in the upper section, the lockdown on these is really decent in the midfoot. It's just that in the rear foot, because that ankle collar is actually a little bit more minimalist, that's where you get the play, and I think that's where you start to get some sliding back and forth in the shoe when you are sliding, but it also has a lot to do with the outsole, which let's go check out. Now, the outsole tread of the turbos is this really uneven herringbone pattern. It gets really flat underneath the big toe joint, but then it gets very narrow and long on the lateral side of the shoe. Then it also has a periphery of herringbone, which I really like, especially on the medial side. It does give a lot of grip. Now, on this grip test ramp here, these things did not start to slide until 36 degrees, which is pretty decent, especially for a shoe that has some sliding capabilities. What I noticed about these though, is that when you want to stop, these things will stop for you. And that's where I noticed my foot sliding into the shoe. Now you can do things to prevent that by putting pads in and everything, but in my opinion, the rubber on this is going to have to break in a little bit before you're going to get really consistent sliding on these. These are more meant for speed, bounding down the court, using those zoom air units to cover ground, and then using good footwork to stop and go the other direction. I know that they're meant to slide. I just think that the sliding on these comes once the rubber is a little bit more broken in. Yeah, I mean, when I was covering large areas of the court, going north to south serving and volleying, if you give these shoes a few really hard steps, they're gonna give a lot back to you. The problem is with their weight. So if you look at the speed ratio, they come in at a 2.54, shank score of 0.2, brings up to a 2.74, which is, you know, really darn good for a shoe, especially with this weight. I just think that you have to be the right player to use these. You have to have enough leg strength in you to get the benefits of this shoe. It can feel a little bit clunky, I think. If you're somebody on the skinnier side or someone that doesn't have really strong legs, you're not gonna be able to put enough force into the shoe for those two zoom air units in the speed board to really give you anything back in return. The nice thing is though, if you're sliding or stopping on a dime, the outsole tread is probably gonna stay with you for a while. If you look at the outsole durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, not even a millimeter of damage on these. And that's why I said you really have to have a lot of break-in with these, because I was expecting these to slide. And I think that's why I was jamming my toes in them so much more than other shoes. I mean, I noticed it more in these. When I was double socked, it was a lot better than I was single socked. But I think, like I said, you're gonna have to give these a little bit of time because the outsole tread is pretty darn durable. So I think you give these a little bit of time. I think they're gonna get more and more and more buttery as you use them more and more. The fit of the GP Challenge 1 is that of a lot of forgiveness. You know, my 2E foot really had no issues in these. If you are a really narrow foot and you are a short foot, I think you can go down 1/2 size. Otherwise, narrow medium foot, go true to size 2E, go true to size 4E. I wouldn't be going up more than 1/2 size because there is air in the heel and in the forefoot. There's not a lot of room for break-in in this shoe, so you do not want to introduce heel slipping, and these things do have a little bit of heel slippage when you first put them on. As long as you lock them down decently enough, they're fine, but you don't want to go be looking for heel slippage in these. The next thing is for the snake bitten foot, these are probably one of the better Nikes out there, if not the best one out there, because it has a decently broad shank in them. It's got, you know, the flanges like the GP Challenge Pro, except for the fact that the GP Challenge Pro is a little bit more laterally stable than the ones. However, ball of foot pain, heel pain, tendonitis, anything like that, a low profile orthotic works well in these. A bulky orthotic is gonna have you pushing out of the heel of the shoe. So just remember, get the right orthotic for these and they should treat you fine. So of course, the biggest question about the performance of the GP Challenge 1 is it the Nike GP Turbo reincarnated? I would say no, but it's close. They definitely have a lot of the easy springboard feeling of the Turbo. They don't have the snap of the Turbo though. That Turbo with the full-length Pebex plate and the full-length Zoom Strobel and the Zoom underneath of that, you know, just all those cavities of air going the full length of the shoe, you really can't recreate that with two independent Zoom air units. That being said, this is the perfect use of a speedboard with the two Zoom air units. It feels so much more alive than the GP Challenge Pro. The GP Challenge Pro, though, is more laterally stable. It's just a more kind of grounded shoe. So if you want more stability, the GP Challenge Pro is great because instead of a Zoom Air unit, it has all of that stack in there of foam in the forefoot versus this one where it's air. That being said, these do get off the blocks a little bit quicker than most other maximalist shoes. They do feel a little bit heavy on foot, whereas the GP Turbos, even though they were a little bit heavy, they didn't feel heavy on foot at all because they just gave so much back to you. The other thing I would say is the containment at high speeds is not as great. And when you are sliding side to side, if you're someone that slides very everted on the inside of their foot, then you're probably gonna like it because you got a lot of room in there. If you're someone like me who's a little bit higher arched, and sometimes it feels like you're gonna pop out of the shoe. So is it the GP Turbo? No, just in general, it's a good shoe. So I think, you know, if you like the GP Turbo, it is, to me, it's worth it to give these a try. I know for me, I definitely got whiffs of the Turbo in these, kind of got some of that similar feeling. It's just, it's not the exact same shoe. So put it this way, if I was going to buy a Nike tennis shoe right now, it's like my everyday tennis shoe, the shoe I was gonna compete in, yeah, I would choose the Nike GP Challenge 1, and honestly, it wouldn't really be close for me. This is definitely my favorite Nike tennis shoe that is out right now. No, it's not exactly like the GP Turbo, but the trappings of it, it just does a lot of what the GP Turbo did do, and it reminds me enough of it. And like I said, the covering long distances of the court, that kind of footwork in these I really like. And I also like the fact, like the GP Challenge Pro, that it's got the rear foot flange as well as the forefoot flange. That's why I said when I did the GP Challenge Pro video, you know, which one are you gonna go with? Because they both have their pros and cons. They are a little bit of a different shoe. I know a lot of people were saying, oh, I'm gonna go with the GP Challenge Pro, but prior to seeing the review video. But I'd love to know, I mean, do you think the Challenge Pro or the Challenge 1 is gonna be a better seller? Let me know in the comments down below. And speaking of, if you do wanna see the younger sibling to the GP Challenge 1, the GP Challenge Pro, go onto the knife. That's a mouthful. Make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect, rubber, and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.